In 1746, hundreds of people were driven from their homes. An entire town was wiped from the face of the earth. The reason? It simply spoiled the view from the window of a man who decided to build his palace here. The foundation of this palace was laid on the ashes of a civil war. Its owner was the Lord Justice General of Scotland. He sent his enemies to their execution and took their lands for himself. Today, you know this place as the luxurious estate from the series Downton Abbey. We will show you how the most grandiose symbol of power in Scotland turned into a financial trap that nearly destroyed its creators. But to understand this, you need to know the original sin that was laid into the very first stone of this castle. Look, this is not a building. It is a statement, carved in stone and mist. It doesn't stand by the water. It holds it hostage. Loch Fyne, a lake the color of mercury, obediently reflects its silhouette. 4 towers like clenched fists, conical roofs, sharp as daggers, ready to pierce the low, wounded sky. It seems created not by the hand of an architect, but by the will of a tyrant. It smells of damp stone, lake water, and meticulously polished regret. Every year, hundreds of thousands of people come here. They pay to enter. They point their cameras at the flawless facade, at the lawns trimmed with surgical precision. They buy postcards on which the castle looks like a dream. Here is the current Duke. He smiles. His handshake is firm, his gaze direct. He speaks of heritage, of duty to his ancestors, of preserving beauty for future generations. This is the story he sells, and it is a very good story. But step off the tourist path. Listen to the whisper of the wind sweeping down from the hills, and the story changes. Why do the locals still talk about music? About the thin, cold sound of a harp that emanates from the walls when death approaches one of the Campbells. They say it's the ghost of a young man, hanged here in 1644. His melody is not one of sorrow. It's a reminder, a debt that was never paid. This castle is an icon, one of the jewels of Scotland. It even became a star, playing the role of a fictional estate in Downton Abbey. The perfect backdrop for a television drama, because the real drama of this place is too ugly to be filmed. Ask the descendants of the clans whose lands were burned, whose names were erased from history by the sword and the pen of the law. For them, this is no fairy tale palace. It is a monument built on blood and betrayal. Every hewn stone in its walls was paid for with someone else's grief. Every room holds the echo not of grand balls, but of death sentences. We are used to looking at houses like these as treasure troves, as history's frozen music. But that is a mistake. This house is not a museum. It is a crime scene, perfectly preserved. The walls are washed clean, the weapons on them polished. But the air still holds the chill of the original sin. And if you stand still in an empty hall, you can hear the past still breathing in the darkness. 1746. The Highlands are burning. The air is thick with smoke and defeat. The last hope of the Stuarts is crushed in the bloody mud of Culloden. For Scotland, it is the end of an era. For Archibald Campbell, the 3rd Duke of Argyll, it is the beginning of a business. Forget family treasures and ancient fortunes. The foundation of Inveraray Castle was not laid on them. It was laid on the ruins of other people's lives. It was a simple, brilliant, and ruthless scheme. While his neighbors wagered their lives and lands for a rebel prince, Campbell bet on the winner, and the winner paid generously for loyalty. Source 1. Land. It was no longer passed down by inheritance. It was torn from cooling hands. The Duke's regiments, loyal to the government, participated in the cleansings of the Highlands. It was a euphemism for plunder. They drove cattle, burned homes, and then the Duke's lawyers arrived with documents, and new borders appeared on the maps, the borders of the Campbell Empire, drawn in ash. Source 2. The law. The Duke was not just an aristocrat. He was the Lord Justice General of Scotland. Imagine a theater where the judge, the prosecutor, and the chief beneficiary are all the same person. The trials of the Jacobites were a farce. The bang of his gavel was the sound of a funeral bell. Every guilty verdict meant not only execution for an enemy, but the transfer of his property to the treasury, and the treasury was in his pocket. Source 3. Direct betrayal, paid for in gold. London understood that the Highlands had to be kept on a leash, and Campbell was their attack dog. After suppressing the rebellion, the government paid him £21,000, millions in today's money. Officially, compensation for the loss of feudal rights. In fact, payment for him to become the king's absolute, undisputed viceroy in these wild lands. 30 pieces of silver, cast in gold. Every pound of that money, every acre of confiscated land, every stolen cow, is an invisible brick in the walls of the future castle. The blueprints were not drawn on parchment, but on confiscation orders. The mortar was mixed with the tears of widows. They say the first stone was laid in 1746, in the year of the Great Slaughter. That is a lie. The first stone was laid the moment Archibald Campbell realized that on the ruins of another's dream, you can build a kingdom of your own. This was not construction. This was raising a trophy on a field of ashes. He was called the uncrowned King of Scotland. Forget the chieftain in a tartan, with a sword in hand and a wild cry on his lips. Archibald Campbell was more dangerous. He was modern. His brother was a warrior, his glory forged on the battlefields of Europe. Archibald was a lawyer. His weapon was not the blade, but the paragraph of the law. His battlefield was not the heather, but the parquet floor of a courtroom. He knew that the quiet rustle of parchment bearing a confiscation decree killed more reliably than a musket volley. In his hands, the law was not a shield for the innocent, but a flexible, sharp instrument that could be used to accuse, ruin, and execute, all while maintaining a veneer of civility. He was a man of the Enlightenment, a co-founder of the Royal Bank of Scotland, a patron of the sciences who brought new trees and new ideas to the country. He believed in reason, in logic, in progress. And this same man, a believer in progress, one day looked out the window of his old castle, gazed upon the town of Inveraray, where his people had lived for centuries, and ordered it to be demolished, completely, wiped from the face of the earth, because it spoiled the view from the window of his future palace. This was not the tyranny of a madman. It was an act of absolute, almost divine power. He didn't just rule the land, he moved it at his whim. Hundreds of people were relocated, their homes destroyed, their pasts erased for the sake of a perfect panorama. It was from this will that the castle's design was born. It wasn't a home, it was a manifesto. Its severe, almost military Gothic facade faced the Highlands. It was a cry frozen in stone. I am your new power, iron, undisputed. Your rebellions are over. It looked like a fortress because it was meant to be a reminder of the power that could crush any enemy. But inside, it spoke a different language. The luxurious neoclassical interior, French tapestries, painted ceilings, all of it was a quiet, insinuating whisper addressed to the London elite. I am one of you, civilized, sophisticated, not a wild Highlander, but your equal partner in governing the empire. It was an instrument of power. Every room, every corridor was designed not for comfort, but for display. And the most chilling part, the man who conceived this world, who tore down an entire town for it, who invested all his genius and all his ruthlessness into it, never set foot inside. Archibald Campbell died in 1761, long before the last painter laid down his brush. He wasn't building for himself. He was building for his name. He became the first ghost of his own perfect kingdom, a ghost who never found a room for himself. This was not creation. This was war, a war declared by one man on the entire world. The first enemy was the land itself, the Scottish land. It did not want to be tamed. Delivering materials to this remote wilderness was a logistical nightmare. Every beam, every block of sandstone, every nail, it was all dragged along roads that were merely directions in the mud. Horses fell, cart axles broke, men cursed the rain that fell for weeks, turning the construction site into a cold, viscous swamp, and the stone itself seemed to resist. The greenish, fickle slate, quarried on site, crumbled in the craftsman's hands, cracked in the bitter Scottish frost, as if refusing to serve a symbol of power it despised. Every perfectly hewn block was a small victory, torn from nature's grasp. And in the midst of this chaos, real war came. 1745, the Jacobite Rising. The construction site turned into a garrison overnight. The hammering was replaced by the creak of weapon carts. Unfinished walls became barricades. The workers took up muskets. The Duke's vision, his great monument to peace and order, found itself on the front line of a civil war. His dream could have burned down before it was even born. The war with men ended, but the war with time was just beginning. Time was a patient assassin. In 1749, it struck. Roger Morris, the first architect, the man who held the entire design in his head, died. The project was orphaned. The blueprints lay on the tables, but the genius who created them was silenced forever. But the main enemy wasn't the stone or the rebels. The main enemy was the project's own hunger. It was a financial black hole, sucking in all the revenues of the ducal empire. Every exquisite cornice, every column, every scroll of plasterwork demanded gold. Gold won in war, and from confiscations now went to a war against granite. The Duke squeezed every drop from his lands, from his people, to feed this stone monster. 43 years. Think about that. 43 years of continuous struggle. A whole lifetime. The project outlived its commissioner. It outlived its first architect. It outlived an entire generation of stonemasons. This was no longer a castle. It was an obsession. A monstrous skeleton, slowly taking on flesh of stone, wood, and other people's lives. Archibald Campbell had won. He had forced the land to submit, his enemies to flee, and time to retreat. But the price of that victory was etched in the cracks on the walls before they were even finished. He was dead, but his creation was not. The castle finally opened its eyes, but there was no one to look. The halls, designed for triumphant balls, for the whispers of political intrigue, for the demonstration of absolute power, were empty. Only the draught and the echo of a lone servant's footsteps wandered through them. The golden cage had been built, but the bird that dreamed of singing in it had flown away forever. Step into the armory hall. This is the heart of the castle, and this heart is cold. Walls 21 meters high, clad in an armor of weapons. 1,300 blades, muskets, halberds. Here hang the guns taken from dead Highlanders at Culloden. Every barrel is a life cut short. This was meant to be a hymn to victory. But without the victor, it became a mausoleum. A quiet, dusty memorial to battles that no longer interest anyone. The weapons are silent, and their silence is deafening. And in the drawing rooms, lavish tapestries, woven in Paris, stare with their faded, threaded eyes at empty chairs. They witnessed the execution of a king, the intrigues of Versailles. They were brought here to see the triumph of a new Scottish king. Instead, they see only patterns of light on the parquet floor, the perfect set for a play that was never performed. Irony, as sharp as a dagger, saturated the very air of this house. The castle, conceived as a center of power, a magnet for authority and money, became a trap for the heirs. It didn't generate income, it devoured it. Every leaking roof, every decaying tapestry, every crack in the wall demanded gold. It transformed from a symbol of power into a crushing burden, an exorbitant, ever-hungry stone idol, demanding sacrifices from the family that was supposed to worship it. Archibald's heirs were not titans. They were ordinary people. And this house was not built for people. It was built for a demigod. And now, it was slowly but surely draining the lifeblood from the dynasty that had created it. A long, painful bankruptcy began, stretching over a century. The castle that was supposed to immortalize the Campbells' wealth became the primary reason for their decline. It stood, gleaming in its cold splendor, while a pit of debt slowly opened up beneath its foundations. The most expensive tomb a man ever built. A tomb not for a body, but for ambition. Time is the best solvent for pride. It flows slowly, almost imperceptibly. First, it eats away the gilding, then the stone, and then it gets to the most important thing, the myth. The Victorian era dressed the castle in new, heavy velvet. Queen Victoria graced it with her visit, and it seemed the crown's glitter momentarily restored the walls to their former glory. But it was an illusion. Beneath the velvet, the cracks were already spreading. The 20th century arrived not with war, but with accountants, and the numbers were more ruthless than any army. The heirs were no longer uncrowned kings. They were managers of a failing enterprise. The titans who built empires were replaced by aristocrats trying to make ends meet. But the real crack wasn't in the stone. It ran through the family itself. 1963. The 11th Duke and his wife, Margaret. Their divorce became more than just a family drama. It became a national spectacle. The courtroom turned into an arena where all the dirty laundry of the Campbell clan was aired. Accusations of infidelity, of debauchery, of perversion, and the famous photograph, the picture that became a symbol of the fall, the Duchess with an unknown lover whose face was out of frame, the headless man. The tabloids feasted on every word, every detail. Overnight, the untouchable aristocracy, the masters of the Highlands, the descendants of great warriors and politicians, turned into characters from a tabloid saga, heroes of a cheap scandal. In that moment, the most important thing collapsed. The walls fell, not the stone ones, the invisible ones, the walls of fear, respect, and myth that had protected this family for centuries. The castle, built to display strength and hide weakness, could no longer hide anything. Its thick walls were powerless against the whispers of newspaper headlines. It ceased to be a fortress. It became just a house where unhappy, vulnerable people lived. Shame, like water, seeped through the stonework, and the facade, so proud and impregnable, showed its first, real, incurable crack. Sometimes, history rhymes with cruel irony. November 1975. The castle's agony reached its peak. Not in a courtroom, not on the pages of newspapers, but in fire. It started quietly, just a spark in the dark, and then the flame, like a vengeful spirit, broke free. It devoured the halls that had survived wars and centuries. It licked the tapestries, turning mythical scenes into black ash. Smoke poured from the windows like the death cry of a stone giant. When the fire was extinguished, the castle stood, blackened and broken. This was the end, the moment of truth. They could have just walked away. Let it die. Let it become a picturesque ruin. Cast off the unbearable burden from their shoulders. But the family made a different choice. They decided to save it. And to do so, they had to endure the greatest humiliation their ancestor could have ever imagined. They began to beg. A worldwide fundraising campaign. Clan Campbell appealed to everyone who bore that name around the world. To farmers in Australia, to clerks in Canada, to the descendants of the very tenants their ancestors had driven from the lands. The lords asked for help from the commoners to save the palace built on their submission. But even that was not enough, and so they took the final, unthinkable step. They opened the gates. They let the crowd in. The castle, which was built to keep the world at a distance, to demonstrate the uncrossable chasm between the master and everyone else, now survived at their expense. Tourists with cameras walked the same corridors where the fate of the nation was once decided. Their £5, their $10, became the blood that sustained the life in its dying body. The owners of the Highlands started selling tickets. Absolute power became a tourist attraction. It was the end of an era, a quiet, businesslike, commercial end. There were no longer dukes and their subjects. There were museum owners and their customers. To save the crown, they didn't just have to sell it off piece by piece. They had to give it away to anyone willing to pay the price of admission. We are back where we started, at the perfect postcard, at the flawless facade, reflected in the dead water of the lake. But now, we know the price of this gloss. We know what cement holds these stones together. So what is left of the grand design of the uncrowned king? What is left of his titanic will to immortalize his power? Stone, and an echo, and history's cruel, brilliant mockery. The castle survived, but it's the survival of a corpse that's been given a flawless makeover. The essence was gutted, but the shell was preserved. The fortress, whose walls were meant to inspire dread in its enemies, has become a film set for romantic dramas. The palace, built to demonstrate absolute power over the common people, now lives off their money, off their curiosity, off their desire to touch a fairy tale without knowing its terrible plot. Absolute power has become a business, and business demands a smile. You don't hear the whisper of conspirators, but the ringing of a cash register in the gift shop. It doesn't smell of power, but of floor wax and faint disappointment. And here it is, time's final, most venomous verdict. The castle, built with money from an alliance with London and for suppressing the Scottish spirit, today feeds its owners by selling tickets to tourists who have come to see the real Scotland. A symbol of oppression has become its most photographed symbol. Can beauty born from violence redeem its origins? Look at these walls. They have redeemed nothing. They have simply forgotten. They are silent about the blood in their foundations, because it's bad for business. Archibald Campbell's ambitions didn't evaporate. They drowned in the quiet, cold waters of Loch Fyne, leaving only their perfect reflection on the surface. A beautiful, empty, flawless postcard. And so, the story of a great ambition turns into a story of great irony. A monument born to rule has learned to survive by selling its past, and its walls, intended as a chronicle of power, have become nothing more than a flawless backdrop. When we look at such beauty, are we obligated to remember its bloody price? Or is the right to be forgotten the Creator's greatest victory? This is a conversation that doesn't end with the final credits. Share your thoughts below. Your like and subscription are the best way to say that stories like these need to be heard.